Stop! How many times have you said those words? You learned them as a child. You recite them at bedsides, at funerals. You believe they came directly from Jesus, unchanged, sacred. I need to tell you, those words were changed, deliberately, and the men who changed them kept the originals. Most people, when they hear a claim like that, make a small internal adjustment. Not rejection, adjustment. Whoever is saying this, they think, must mean something marginal, a variant reading in a footnote. A minor translation dispute that specialists argue about in journals no one else reads. Not the prayer itself, not the text that Catholics and Protestants and Anglicans and Orthodox Christians all share. The one point of verbal overlap across every fracture in the tradition. I mean exactly that. I spent a considerable portion of my working life with the primary sources of the New Testament in Greek, teaching from them, testing my students on them, sitting with the manuscript tradition in ways that the standard Sunday morning presentation of the text does not require or encourage. And what I can tell you from that position is that the Lord's Prayer, you know, every word of it, including the ones you have never thought to question, has a paper trail. The paper trail tells a story, and the story is considerably more complicated than what the received version of the prayer's history asks you to accept. But before I show you what the manuscripts actually say, I need to give you a frame. Because Spinoza gave us the frame, and without it, the evidence risks being absorbed as curiosity rather than understood as mechanism. Spinoza, in his most significant and most dangerous work, the book he published in 1670 without his name on it, without the city of publication, without the printer's identity, because the last man who had written something comparable had been found dead before the edition could circulate, wrote a sentence I have turned over many times. He said that any text transmitted through human hands will carry the marks of those hands. He was describing not deliberate fraud in most cases, but something more ordinary and more pervasive. The tendency of each generation of transmitters to adjust the text they are carrying to serve the community they are serving, to make it say, a little more clearly, what they already believed it meant. That mechanism has been at work on the Lord's Prayer from the 1st century to the present one. The evidence is available in manuscripts that have been sitting in academic libraries for well over 100 years. Let me show you what they contain. The first thing the documents tell you is something the standard explanation mentions and then moves past as quickly as possible. There are two versions of the Lord's Prayer in the New Testament: Matthew chapter 6 verses 9 through 13, Luke chapter 11 verses 2 through 4. Anyone with a serious religious education knows about this. They have been told, in the reassuring language of institutional presentation, that Matthew records the longer liturgical form and Luke the shorter, more intimate one. Different communities, different contexts, different lengths. Essentially, the same prayer. That framing is true. It is also doing significant work that its smoothness conceals, because the two versions do not simply differ in length, they differ in a specific word, the word at the center of the most personal petition in the prayer, the one about what you have done wrong and what you need to be released from. That word is not the same in Matthew and Luke. It is not even close to the same. In Matthew 6 verse 12, the petition reads, "Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors." The Greek word is ophileuma, an economic term. The root refers to something owed, a sum outstanding, an obligation that has not been discharged. The metaphor Matthew's Jesus is using for moral failure is a financial one, a ledger, an account, something that accumulates and requires settlement. In Luke 11 verse 4, the petition reads, "Forgive us our sins, for we ourselves forgive everyone who is indebted to us." The Greek word is hamartia, a different word entirely. It means a missing of the mark, a term from archery originally that came to describe moral failure as a deviation from an intended direction. Not a ledger, a trajectory, not an account, but an aim. The entire conceptual framework is different. Now, if Jesus taught his disciples a prayer, if he sat with them at some specific moment and said in Aramaic the words he wanted them to carry forward, he used one word, not two. The two evangelists, writing for two different communities in two different decades, chose two different Greek words to represent whatever Aramaic he spoke. This is not a matter of nuance or interpretive emphasis. If Matthew's word is closer to what Jesus said, then Luke changed it. If Luke's word is closer, then Matthew changed it. If neither is close, then the original has been lost behind two different community preferences. These are the only three options, and all three of them mean the same thing. The prayer, as you know it, did not arrive untouched. Spinoza saw this and wrote about it with the kind of precision that made him unwelcome in every community he ever belonged to. He said that when two documents purporting to record the same teaching differ at the point of their central content, what you are looking at is not two records of one event. You are looking at two texts produced by two communities with different theological emphases, each using the authority of the source to establish what they already believed. The standard response, I gave it myself in seminars for many years, is that variations of this kind are to be expected in the recording of oral tradition, that the two words carry overlapping meanings within the first-century Jewish moral vocabulary. All of that is defensible. It is also the management version. It is what you say when the honest answer is too inconvenient to give, but that is only the first layer. Stay with me, because the manuscripts have considerably more to show you. I want to take you to a conference room in the north of England. I am fairly certain it was York, though I would not stake anything important on that. Late autumn, the kind of afternoon light that arrives low and gray in those northern cities and stays at the same angle from 2 in the afternoon until dark. A conference on New Testament textual criticism, the sort of gathering that attracts a particular species of scholar who has spent so many years with manuscripts that the manuscripts have become more real to them than the present century. I had presented something that morning on an unrelated question and was in the in-between time of the afternoon break, standing near one of those hospitality tables with tea that had been sitting too long in large urns. I was introduced briefly to a man whose published work on the Codex Sinaiticus I had been reading for several years. Not someone who made dramatic claims, the opposite. A scholar of the meticulous, cautious kind for whom overstating a finding is the particular category of failure he most wants to avoid. We were standing near the seminar room doors, watching the corridor gradually empty. I asked him what he considered the most significant thing the Sinaiticus consistently showed that the later manuscript tradition did not. He said without pausing, honesty. Just that. Then he elaborated. He said the Codex Sinaiticus was the most honest witness to what Matthew and Luke actually wrote, because it predated the period when liturgical practice had begun to edit the manuscript tradition to match what communities were already doing in their services. He said the subsequent manuscript tradition was, and this is his phrase, not mine, ecclesiastical housekeeping. He said it in the flat tone of someone describing an assessment too well established to require drama. Then the corridor cleared toward the next session, and he moved away. I stood there for a moment after he had gone. The tea in my hand had been cold for some time, because what he had described in a corridor in Yorkshire, in the tone of a man stating the obvious, is the thing the standard presentation of the Lord's Prayer cannot accommodate without becoming something other than the standard presentation. The Codex Sinaiticus was produced around the middle of the 4th century. It is the oldest complete New Testament we possess. In Matthew 6, in the version of the Lord's Prayer that the Sinaiticus contains, the prayer ends after the petition for forgiveness. There is no doxology, no "For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever." None of it. The manuscript ends where the petition ends. The Codex Vaticanus, produced at almost exactly the same period and now housed in the Vatican Library, contains the same absence. The lines that most Protestant and evangelical Christians have memorized as the conclusion of the prayer, the closing affirmation that transforms petition into doxology, are not in the oldest complete New Testament we have found, not in either of the two manuscripts that most closely preserve what Matthew's community wrote down. The Didache, a document I will return to in detail shortly, and this is important, provides the earliest evidence of the doxology's origins. Dating to approximately the end of the 1st century, it records the Lord's Prayer with an instruction appended. Say this 3 times a day. The doxology appears there as a congregational response, clearly marked as a liturgical addition for communal use, not as text, as rubric, as the thing the assembly says together after the prayer is finished. Scribes copying Matthew in the 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries knew the prayer from use. They knew how it ended in their communities, because they said it that way every week. When they copied a manuscript that ended the prayer without the doxology, many of them supplied the ending they knew, not dishonestly, out of the most ordinary human impulse, completing the familiar, copying what they knew, rather than what the text in front of them said. The closing that feels most natural, most rounded, most finished, the part that sounds like a proper ending, entered the Byzantine manuscript tradition around the 9th century. Our oldest complete copy of the New Testament ends the prayer 5 centuries earlier, without it. But the doxology is not where the changes become most specific or most personal. For that, I need to take you to a word that every Anglican and every Protestant who has ever said the Lord's Prayer in English has used without question. A word that does not appear in any 1st century Greek manuscript in the form it was given to you. And there is a name behind this word. One man. In 1526. The word is trespasses. William Tyndale was an English scholar who produced the first printed translation of the New Testament, directly from the Greek into English. 1526. He was gifted in the specific way that makes prose sound like thinking rather than composition. His rhythms and his word choices were so precise that entire passages of his translation were absorbed almost verbatim into the King James Bible 85 years later. He also died for his work. He was arrested, imprisoned for over a year, strangled, and then burned at the stake. The year was 1536. The charge was heresy. In Matthew's Lord's Prayer, Tyndale needed to translate ophileuma, the word that means a debt, an outstanding obligation, a sum owed. He chose trespasses, Middle English legal vocabulary for an unlawful intrusion, a crossing of a boundary you had no right to cross. It carries a different weight from debts. It implies not accumulation, but violation, not an account, but a border. He made a translator's choice, a word from the legal vocabulary of 16th century England, not from the Greek manuscripts he was working from. In 1549, the Book of Common Prayer standardized that choice for the entire Anglican communion. One translator's decision, made in 1526, became the settled form for the Lord's Prayer across every territory the Anglican and Protestant tradition reached. Every Anglican who has ever said the prayer has said the word Tyndale chose, not a word the 1st century manuscripts contain. There is no Greek text of the 1st century that contains the concept Tyndale introduced. Matthew uses ophileuma. Luke uses hamartia. Neither of them uses the concept that trespasses imports. Tyndale was not translating a source that contained his word. He was making a judgment about what the word should carry for English-speaking people, and the Church adopted his judgment as if it were the apostolic original. He was burned for heresy 9 years after making it. The word he chose, which the institution called heretical when he was alive, became the word the institution required when he was dead. I have sat with that particular irony for a long time, and I am not sure it resolves. There is still the question of the ending. And this is where it gets interesting, because what I found next I did not expect. I want to tell you about a question I could not answer honestly. It was a seminar room in Durham. I place it around 2010, though I cannot be fully certain of the year. A postgraduate course in New Testament Greek, the kind where the students have chosen to be there and arrive with a level of preparation that means you cannot manage the conversation the way you can with undergraduates, fulfilling a requirement. There was a student in the second row who always came in with the Nestle Aland already open to the day's passage, the scholarly Greek edition. She did not carry it as a prop, she used it. Somewhere in a session on Matthew's Lord's Prayer and its Lucan parallel, she raised her hand. She said carefully, without any edge in the question, if Matthew uses ophileuma and Luke uses hamartia, which word did Jesus actually use? It is, when you sit with it, a reasonable question. If Jesus taught his disciples a prayer in Aramaic, if he said specific words at a specific moment, those words were translated into Greek, and the Greek appears differently in 2 different gospel accounts. Any of 3 possibilities follows. Matthew's word is closer to what Jesus said. Luke's word is closer, or neither is close, and what we have are 2 community translations of something that has been lost. I gave her the management answer. Different communities, different emphases, different liturgical contexts. I said it fluently, with the smooth confidence of someone who has said the same thing enough times that it no longer feels like evasion. I moved on. She wrote something in her notebook. Did not press. I walked back to my office afterward with the chalk still on my hands. I sat down. The next thing I had planned did not get started, because what I had given her was a way of making the question feel answered when it was not. I had not said that the two words mean different things. I had not said that if Jesus used one, then one evangelist is not recording what he said. She deserved better than what I gave her. I have thought about that seminar a number of times since. Now listen carefully, because what comes next changes the frame entirely. In November of 2017, Pope Francis gave an interview to Italian state television. He was asked about the phrase, "Lead us not into temptation." He said, and I am giving you the substance of what he said as accurately as I can, that the translation is not good. He said it implies that God leads human beings toward temptation, and that this does not accord with what the Church believes about the nature of God. He said the French bishops were right to change their version, and he hoped other churches would follow. The French Catholic Church had already changed it. Not lead us not into temptation. Do not let us enter into temptation. The agency is shifted. Not God conducting a soul toward danger, but the soul asking not to be brought to the moment of crisis. The Church of Italy changed its official text in 2020. Other national Catholic conferences have followed. The significance of that is worth stating plainly. The Bishop of Rome, as the highest doctrinal authority in Catholic Christianity, said on television that the translation of a phrase in the Lord's Prayer was not good. Not a marginal phrase. The Lord's Prayer. The prayer that has been recited more times by more human beings than any other words ever written down. If the translation was not good in 2017, it was not good in 1917 or 1517. It was not good whenever it was first rendered in that form. The institution said this quietly, on Italian television, and moved on. What else was changed before that without the announcement? I said I would return to the Didache, and this is the moment, because what it shows goes further than anything I have presented so far. The Didache, its full title translates roughly as the teaching of the 12 apostles to the nations, is one of the oldest surviving Christian documents outside the canonical New Testament. Scholars date most of it to approximately 80 to 100 of the Common Era. Some argue for even earlier portions. That places it roughly contemporary with the Gospel of John and possibly earlier than the final form of some synoptic material. It was lost for most of Christian history, rediscovered in a monastery in Constantinople in 1873, and in its 8th chapter, it records the Lord's Prayer in full with a liturgical instruction attached. Say this 3 times daily. The version it records is not Matthew's, it is not Luke's. It is a third version, distinct from both. But it is the doxology that matters most for this particular point. The Didache's doxology reads, "For thine is the power and the glory forever." Power and glory. 2 of the 3 elements. The third, kingdom, is absent. The word that is theologically most loaded, most concerned with the question of authority and governance, most politically resonant in the language of first-century Judaism and Christianity, kingdom asserts something specific about who holds ultimate power over the created order, is not there. In the oldest liturgical document we possess that records the Lord's Prayer in active congregational use, the kingdom has not yet arrived. Kingdom entered the doxology through the Byzantine manuscript tradition, the manuscripts that came to dominate the Eastern Church, and from there influenced the text that the Protestant reformers preferred when they returned to Greek sources. Kingdom is not a neutral theological addition, it makes a claim, a specific claim about authority, about sovereignty, about the structure of divine power over earthly power. It is a political word as much as a theological one, and it entered the doxology of the Lord's Prayer without any attestation in the oldest documents, without any claim of apostolic transmission. I'm going to count this for you, because I think the full number needs to be stated plainly. We have Matthew's version, or Philema for debts, no doxology in the oldest manuscripts. We have Luke's version, hamartia for sins, no doxology. We have the didashes version, a third form of the text, with a doxology that reads power and glory but does not contain kingdom. We have the version you know, trespasses, a word from a 16th century English translator who was executed for heresy. A doxology that contains kingdom and arrives in the manuscript tradition several centuries after our oldest sources. And lead us not into temptation, which the current Pope said on camera in 2017 is not a good translation, and which has been officially changed in multiple Catholic countries since. 4 versions, not one of them identical to what you recite. I have tried to find a gentle way to present that, and I have not found one. What Spinoza said, and what I keep returning to because I find it more honest than the alternatives, was this. He did not say that texts transmitted through human hands are therefore false or worthless or beneath trust. He said they carry the marks of those hands. He said the transmission process is legible, that it can be read, and that reading it honestly, following the manuscript evidence, asking who made each decision and when and under what conditions, is the one activity that institutional religion finds it most difficult to encourage in the people it serves. The Lord's Prayer passed through the hands of 2 evangelists who chose different words for the same petition, through the hands of scribes who added a closing because their liturgical practice had taught them the prayer ended that way, through the hands of William Tyndale, who chose trespasses because it carried a weight that debts did not carry in the English of 1526, through the hands of the compilers of the Book of Common Prayer, who standardized his choice for everyone who would follow, and through the hands of the institution's current highest authority, who said in 2017 that one of its phrases was not good, and who said so on television on a Tuesday and moved on to the next question. At every stage, the people whose hands carried the prayer believed they were transmitting the words of Jesus. At every stage, they were also transmitting their own moment, their own theological emphasis, their own community's liturgical practice, their own sense of what the prayer should carry for the people who would use it next. I want to tell you about a Sunday evening a few months ago. I was in my study, autumn in Norfolk, the kind of late that arrives dark before it feels like it should, street outside going quiet earlier than seems right. The lamp was on. I had been working through these notes, the manuscript comparisons, the Tyndale chronology, the didact text, the record of the French liturgical change, and they were spread across the desk in the lamp's yellow pole. The tea had gone cold. I had not replaced it. My aunt telephoned. She is 78 years old. She lives in a village about 20 miles outside Norwich, in a house she has occupied for most of her adult life. She rings every Sunday without exception, at roughly the same hour, in the way that people of her generation keep connection, not through messages or brief exchanges, but through the telephone at a fixed time, as a practice that does not require a particular reason. We talked about usual things, the state of her garden in the early cold, a neighbor whose health had not been good, the kind of conversation that is not about anything in particular, and is, for that reason, the most sustaining kind. Toward the end of the call, she mentioned, as she sometimes does, that she had said her prayers. She said she always says the Our Father before she goes to sleep. She said it simply, without any particular weight, the same words my mother taught me. Then she wished me good night and rang off. I sat for a moment after the call ended. The desk, the lamp, the notes under its light. I had somewhere in the middle of the papers a photocopy of the relevant page of the Codex Sinaiticus, Matthew 6, in 4th century unchanged script, the prayer ending where the petition ends, without the doxology that would arrive 5 centuries later. Honest in its incompleteness. More honest by the standard of what the textual evidence shows than the version her mother taught her. The same words my mother taught me. I did not have any intention of telling her what was on my desk. I do not have any intention now. What she carries with her into her evenings belongs to her and to her mother before her and to the chain of hands that passed it forward, and none of what the manuscripts show changes what that inheritance is or what it does in a life. I understood that sitting there. I understood it clearly, but there is a particular weight that comes from knowing something you have chosen not to say. It is not a comfortable weight. I am not entirely certain it is the right choice. I know it is the choice I made, and I know why I made it, and I'm not sure the why resolves it. What the documents show is this. The prayer that was given to you as the direct and unchanged words of Jesus has, in the version you know it, a closing that was absent from the oldest manuscripts we possess, a central word chosen by a 16th century English translator who was executed for heresy, and a phrase that the Bishop of Rome said on camera in 2017 was not a good translation, and that has since been officially changed in multiple Catholic countries. The oldest liturgical document that records the prayer in congregational use has a doxology that lacks the word kingdom entirely, and the two gospel accounts that transmit the prayer do not agree on the Greek word at the center of its central petition. All of this is in the documents, not in hostile documents, not in fringe scholarship, in the texts the Church itself holds as authoritative, in the manuscripts housed in its own collections, in the public statement of its own highest living authority. Spinoza was right about the mechanism. A text that has passed through human hands carries the marks of those hands, not as a defect, as a fact, and the fact is legible if you are willing to read it. The prayer is human. It passed through the full length of the human story to reach you, through Greek choices made in two different communities, through liturgical accretions added in late antique scriptoria, through a translator's ear for English prose in 1526, through a church council's decision in 1549, through an Italian television interview in 2017. Every stage of that passage is documented. I still say it sometimes. I want to be honest about that. Not in any institutional context, but in the particular quiet of ordinary evenings when what is in front of you exceeds what you have language for. What I say now is something composite, and I find it more weighted than the version I said when I thought it was simple. More weighted because I know now something of what it passed through to reach me. Every hand that carried it, every decision that shaped it. The full human distance between whatever was said in Aramaic in the first century and the words on the page of any missal in print today. That is not a diminishment of the prayer. It is the most honest account of what the prayer is. If you made it to the end of this, write truth in the comments. It tells me the conversation is reaching people who are willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads. There is more to follow. There always is. Take care of yourselves.